Welcome to the Zero Trust Journey podcast, created by cybersecurity practitioners for those walking the same path. We share real stories, hard lessons, and hard-won victories from the field, so you can sidestep the pitfalls and deliver the wins. Grab your coffee, tune out the buzzwords, and let's get into the real story right here on the Zero Trust Journey podcast.
Welcome back to the Zero Trust Journey. Today, we are bringing a completely different and vital perspective to the table with our guest, Erin Logue Smith. Erin is currently leading governance, risk, and cyber strategy at Worldwide Technology, WWT. Before that, she spent over 5 years at Dell Technologies as field CTO, specializing in cybersecurity and resilience. She also spent a decade at PNC managing international data privacy and healthcare compliance, dealing with frameworks like HIPAA, GDPR, and CCPA. What really makes Erin's perspective so unique is her legal foundation. She holds a JD and early in her career worked with the District Attorney's Office and the Innocence Project. Erin, welcome back to the show.
I'm happy to be here. It's been a couple years now, but I'm happy to see that you're still going strong.
Yeah, well, you were my first guest at this show.
Yeah. And how many episodes are you at now? Over 100, right?
Yeah, we have more than 100 episodes. Yes.
Nice. Yeah.
Let's jump into it. And you have extensive knowledge of international privacy laws like GDPR and CCPA, as well as frameworks like NIST Cybersecurity Framework, SEC recommendations, and DORA. There is often a dangerous gap between being compliant and being secure. How do you leverage a zero trust mindset to bridge that gap? Or when you are speaking to your clients, helping organizations turn cyber risk and regulatory mandates into actual strategic advantage, something a tactical plan they can use?
So this is a fine line that you walk with your clients on a regular basis, as I'm sure you know. Nobody wants to have more restrictions. Nobody wants to have to log in a bunch of times or have all of these different ways of protecting their data as they're, going through their processes to just do their everyday job. So I think the fine line is, like you said, between compliance and safety. So we work really hard to communicate with our stakeholders on how we can build out more ways to make things easy. So we want to ensure that we're building out these infrastructures from the ground up so we don't have to repeat processes in the future after a devastating cyber event, but also keeping in mind the education of all of the workforce. So we want to make sure that we're tackling how we're training. We want to make sure we're tackling how they're actually accessing, whether it's a bring your own device or it's a company device or things like that. And I actually find the most people that have the largest issue with putting all of these procedures in place are the C-suite executives. On paper, they're like, yes, we need all of these protections. But then when it comes to them,
themselves,
they're like, I don't want to have to register my device. I don't want to have to go through all these hoops to access an email or a document on my phone.
Yes.
So I think, the biggest buy-in is we have to make sure that our C-suite levels are on board. They're accepting all of these things and all of these risks and implementing these plans on their front and then leading from the top and pushing it down through the organization. And also, not turning a blind eye to what their teams are doing. So just relying on the security team or the risk team or the compliance team to kind of give them a report and tell them how things are going isn't really the trend that we're seeing in the industry anymore. The C-suite executives are really needing to tune up their knowledge and their buy-in on what their teams are doing, because saying, oh, I didn't know what they were doing isn't going to cut it anymore. So that was
You reminded me of a story, actually. So I was consulting for a company, large company, Fortune 500, and the CISO actually was struggling to communicate to a CEO who owned 12 suits. And he wanted to have the key card to enter the building, 12 cards, because he just didn't want to carry one and didn't want to deal with all the forgetting or going to the desk and getting a temporary badge. He just didn't want to deal with it. CEO, right? So we gone through the whole idea of zero trust. We gone through all of that. And then when it came to him, he's like, nope, I'm not giving up those 12. So how do you convince those executives? Is there like a legal remedies or legal scarcity that you can start with where, hey, look, you're executive. If your card is punched and you're not here, you will be one of the suspects when it comes to it. Like, how would you convince them?
Well, I think it's the regulatory landscape has answered that question. I think that, the government, like the SEC and all of the regulatory bodies have gotten sick of whenever these devastating events happen, the CISO goes, "Oh, I didn't know it was going to happen," or, my team was in charge of that. They're getting slammed now with fines and they're actually getting fired. Boards are taking them to the ringer. And if there's evidence that they weren't following the procedures, they weren't, leading from the front, they're being held accountable from, their boss. So the CISO has to report up to the CEO. And a lot of the times now the CISOs are the ones that are taken to the chopping block whenever there is a devastating event and they can't articulate why it happened, and they weren't following the policies and procedures themselves. The CEO,
Yeah.
though, is always tough.
It is, right? Because most of the time, CISOs or CIOs, end up reporting under CEO. It's very few and unusual places where I've seen the CISO reporting directly to the board. That's not uncommon. So, but I think the way of communicating, and that's what I've tried in the past, where you talk to them about, if they don't follow the procedure, they will be held legally responsible. And that's something nobody wants it. It's just one of those things. Your tax advisor and your legal advisor, if they tell you to do something, you just go with it. So, and one of the core themes here at our podcast, we talk about cyber resilience, and you have an extensive background in that. So we talk about 1 to 3 point failures. As we like to say, attackers aren't breaking in, they're logging in. I'm sure you've seen those memes. When an attacker bypasses that proverbial padlock and a catastrophic event occurs, how does a holistic resilience strategy dictate a company's survival? How is the cyber insurance industry fundamentally shifting the way we architect zero trust environments, if you will?
So I actually just had a conversation with a really cool new shocker AI tool that does a lot of the risk reporting. Like they do a lot of analytics around what companies have in their portfolio right now and do a gap analysis and then kind of map that back to cyber insurance underwriting.
Right.
So talk about that product, but it was a really cool conversation because the cyber insurance brokers are getting smarter. Beginning of 2020, and when you and I had our first podcast way back a few years ago now, that landscape has changed. And cyber insurance brokers are sick of paying out of the nose out of things that are happening that companies should be preventing on their own. So I see them getting more savvy, and everyone is using AI in these sorts of ways where they're going to be heavily checking to see what organizations are doing from that holistic perspective. So they want to see mapping of policies and procedures. They want to see tabletop exercises where there is a 0-day event and their team actually was able to run through it without panicking and recover accordingly. And then, they're going to affect and adjust their cyber insurance rates based upon those findings. So the fact is, organizations are going to have to think about those insider threats and then external threats where they're breaking in, and they have to plan and prepare for them in appropriate ways, whether it's through MDR, XDR, cyber incident response retainer services.
Right.
Just that holistic approach from the front end of the attack to that back end of the recovery.
And I think that assume breach mentality is really starting to embed into C-suite conversations as well, that it's not about I am protected or I won't get breached. Well, let's assume breach and let's go with that conversation. I think that's happening to really bring that struggle with effectiveness gap, if you will. Like we need better resilience, but how do you actually test it? How do you optimize your architecture? We don't know that. And assume breach conversation first really lead the rest of the conversation or discussions, I think.
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing that hasn't changed from the beginning of COVID is I would always say it's not a matter of if, but when. And the more we embrace that idea, like it's going to happen at some point, whether you think you are completely secure or not, it's going to happen. Someone's going to, and especially now with AI, they're just finding new and better ways to trick everyone.
Totally. You know what? Let's talk about your Innocence project. Before becoming a field CTO, you were analyzing faulty convictions at the Innocence project and working in white collar crime and investigations branch of the DA's office. How has that legal background, specifically researching past faulty convictions and investigating root causes, shaped your approach to cyber incident response or resilience, uncovering the truth during breach today? Like, how's that background mindset really helps you today? What can you cross-train in this world as well?
That's a very interesting question. I don't think anyone has ever asked me that. But it absolutely 100% has played into my success in this field. I think when I give my background to people, when I'm first meeting with clients, and even when I was interviewing here at WWT, people were
Yeah,
very surprised by my background. It's different than a lot of people that work in cybersecurity. And I think that my investigative approach is what really made me fall in love with cyber resilience and cybersecurity,
right.
because you would think, when I started my career, I wanted to go in, I wanted to make a difference, and I really wanted to help people. But I just found the path that I was on wasn't really satisfying in a way that I thought it would be. And surprisingly, this world of cybersecurity and cyber resilience, you're doing that every day. You're
Right.
doing
You're
investigative work,
helping.
you're educating your customers. And it's really in sync with laws like legal regulations,
Mhm.
that frameworks, regulations, and then regulators that are coming in and looking at our customers, especially like from the finance perspective. If they get an MRA and they're like, oh no, what do we do now? Someone has to come in and interpret what the language and how they can fix the problem. So I think my legal background has set me apart in my field and has given me the analytical and intellectual capacity to really investigate and build out a case for the customer on how they can move forward and, strengthen their environments.
I like that answer. And here I thought you were gonna say, "Well, it depends." So I had these printed out because some of the questions are, "Well, it depends." So, anyways, what a phenomenal conversation, and always from the courtroom to the boardroom and bridging the gap between compliance and zero trust resilience. Thank you so much for sharing your experience and insights, and always pleasure to have you here at the show.
It's always great to be here, and I hope we continue our relationship, and
Of
we'll be
course,
back in another year or two, right?
sooner, hopefully sooner.
That's a wrap on this Zero Trust journey. Now it's your turn. Step into the spotlight, share your story, and be part of the journey. Subscribe to Zero Trust Journey on LinkedIn for the latest news, events, and giveaways. Until next time.